This episode of Where Did the Road Go is brought to you in part by our Patreons. If you want to become a patron, go to wheredidtheroadgo.com. And now our show.
Transmission start. Welcome to Where Did the Road Go? Join us as we wander off the path and explore lost history, consciousness, the paranormal, unexplained mysteries, alternative thought, and much more. We are present on the web at wheredidtheroadgo.com. Now here is your host, Seriah.
Welcome to this edition of Where Did the Road Go? This is our Fringe news show, and with me is Joshua Cutchin.
Part two!
There he is. Timothy Renner.
Hello.
Red Pill Junkie.
Is this on?
Yes. And for the first time, Cherylee Black.
Hi, yeah. Red Pill just stole my thing. I was wondering, did you push the button?
So we've done about an hour of this show, and then I realized the recording software wasn't going. It wasn't even turned on. So we're starting over, except we're going to start with the stories we didn't cover and then go back to the ones that we already covered that no one will ever hear, except for the secret CIA people who are, tuning into our Skype conversation.
You're too kind. It's been about like an hour and a half that we didn't.
Oh, was it?
Yeah.
Yeah, pretty much.
We hopped on started recording about at 11:15, and we stopped recording about 12:30. So
no, we didn't record.
Yeah.
It's fine.
It's fine.
All right, so let's start with this one. This one's gotten a lot of play on the Where Did the Road Go page for good reason. It's a weird story. State police still investigating missing whiteface skier's story. So this is a guy who disappeared in upstate New York and showed up in California 6 days later and has no idea how he got there. This comes from the timesunion.com, this version. State police say they cannot corroborate a whiteface skier's belief that he was driven across the country in a tractor trailer after he vanished earlier in the month from an Adirondack ski resort. We're very interested in any possible trucking company that would have come through the area. And they said that the guy was out skiing with friends when he vanished February 7th from the Wilmington resort. He showed up February 13th in Sacramento, California. They have interviewed him already, but they want to interview him again. Troopers say his story has not changed. Philip Pittis, I think is how you say his name, or something like that, has no clear memory of how he got from the Adirondacks to the California capital, a road trip of nearly 3,000 miles. He wants to find out where he was as badly as we want to find out where he was. Let's see, there was a whole thing. There was some stuff that he remembers. Okay, police in Sacramento found Philippidis still wearing the ski clothing he had on when he disappeared, including his helmet and goggles. I'm just going to stop saying his name because it's really hard. He was given medical attention and taken to a local hospital where he later spoke to two of his children on the phone. He told deputies he remembered little, but thought he'd suffered a head injury, rode in a big rig-style truck, and slept a lot.
Yeah, and the thing is that apparently he paid for his new iPhone with cash, which is and apparently he while he was dialing his wife's phone number, he remembered her name and his relationship to her while he was on the phone. I don't think this quite falls into the missing 411
no, not at all
rubric, but I think that it flirts with it. I think that there is something sketchy going on here. I do not think this is, as a lot of my friends have suggested, that this is purely a fugue state. Generally, when you think about fugue states, you don't think about people transversing, hoboing, hoboing across the country.
Right.
Generally, you think about people in fugue states, going within a certain prescribed area. But I think that there's something within this is very, 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 very weird.
Yes. Yeah, I would agree. I would say, like you just stated, I don't think it's a missing 411 style of case. The criteria is not there. it's almost, as someone pointed out, almost more reminiscent of something like Travis Walton than it is of something in a missing 411 situation.
Except for the distance, though, right?
True. And Travis was in the wilderness, and was found in the wilderness. He never said, "Hey, somebody picked me up in a truck."
Right. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So that, who knows if he was dazed enough, maybe he asked somebody for a ride.
But I suspect that at the end of the day that nothing about this will be mundane. This is not someone trying to get away from their lover or their financial situation. Like, something about this is very, very weird.
But it could be something like, he said he thought he might have had a head injury, and that's entirely possible. That could cause something like this.
And so he had a head injury, and then somebody happened to pull him into a truck, which drove him to Sacramento. Like, the cascading effect of him having a head injury is just a little bit too much for me to swallow.
Well, they didn't necessarily pull him into a truck. He may have asked for a ride, just, been confused.
Or was he like roofied or something?
That's a possibility.
Some of those drugs will make you extremely open to suggestions, so that if someone says get in that truck, you'll go, oh, that sounds like a great idea, off I go.
Yeah, but what's the half-life for that drug? Because this is a week.
Yeah,
right.
That's true.
Something about this is weird. I'm not saying it's supernatural, but something about this is very, very strange.
Yes, I would put money on it not being supernatural in any way, but it is a very weird story.
Maybe it's a case of there was this case that was commented by our friends on Mysterious Universe about this family. I think they were the Trump.
Yes, from Australia.
Exactly. That the whole family, they decided to leave everything behind and go on a trip, across the road, across the country, and at some point, some of the members kind of like woke up of that state, and they I don't remember, they managed to depart from the other family members and call the authorities or something. But anyway, when the reporters tried to interview them, to this day, I think they can't really say what drove them to behave in such a manner.
Yeah, it was the entire family. It's a very strange case, and as I remember, it almost seemed like the younger people in the family sort of started to drop off from the family narrative that we need to get away from here. It was like the youngest sort of was like became disenchanted, and like the next youngest became disenchanted, and eventually they sort of realized like we're falling to paranoia. But I think it speaks a lot to the idea that so mass paranoia can have in a dedicated sort of familial situation, but like what if that happens in an individual?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Okay. Any thoughts, Tim? I don't think you weighed in on this.
Sorry, I was temporarily distracted. It reminded me of, there is one missing 411 case it reminded me of, where I think a college-age kid went missing and turned up far away from college. I feel like he was like somewhere in the Midwest. He was in college and he turned up in Massachusetts or something. But it was like a month later or something. This kid turned up, and he, to my knowledge, he refuses to talk about the time he was missing. And I may have some of the facts that wrong, but that's the one sort of missing 411 thing I was reminded of when I heard this case. But I tend to think So I don't know. I don't know what I want all the facts. I want to see if he can remember anything, or if was he with friends, when he was skiing? Did they talk to them, et cetera, et cetera?
Did they roofie him as a joke and then lose track of him?
Yeah, right.
From what I understand, he was with family members and he went down the slope and he just didn't exit. And there was a concentrated search effort on the slope, and then no one ever found him on either side of that area. So that's when they started questioning like where he was, and then suddenly he popped up in Sacramento.
Yeah, it's definitely a weird case.
Well, I guess time will tell if they figure anything else out, or he remembers maybe something more important to what happened to him.
Get him on the show.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Doesn't sound like he'd have a lot to say. So Cherylee threw this one into our Slack to talk about briefly, but the British Ministry of Defense breaks silence on bombshell U.S. X-Files. I think calling it a bombshell is kind of an overstatement, but basically the British MOD basically said they had completed a one-off study into UFOs previously, and there would be no repeats. The study concluded that most UFO sightings could be attributed to the misidentification of common objects, or most likely the result of some meteorological phenomena. They had
swamp gash.
Yeah, they had no opinion on whether aliens exist. But I would think that the UK, just like the US, probably has other programs going watching this type of unknown phenomena. And they're not going to admit it.
Yeah, sure. Why would they?
Yeah, it's not to their benefit. So, and any other thoughts?
I mean, like, look at, your mileage may vary, but look at the life's work of Nick Pope. It's that his presence and his if a modicum of what he says is true, the UK definitely understands and appreciates the flying saucer phenomena as much as the US does. So, yeah.
And I suspect that's true. I mean, if you have something unknown floating around out there, regardless of what it might be, you want to know as much as you can about it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And especially if you don't fully understand what it is, you're not going to be telling the general public about it.
Of course.
Right, because what they always told people who kept reporting, UFO sightings is that, the British government determined that the phenomenon doesn't pose a threat to the British, sovereignty. This doesn't mean that they're not saying that UFOs aren't real. They like they're saying is we just don't care.
Yeah.
It's none of our concern.
Well, that's kind of what Blue Book came to too. It's not that Blue Book said, "Oh, these things aren't real." They said, "Whatever they are, they're not a threat to U.S. security." That's not the same as saying they're not real.
Which is honestly the problem that the apprehension that I had, talking about the Fringe news, where did the road go updates, is because I tend to view these things with yes and or wait and see, Sure. And it's one of those things where your government is interested in UFOs, yeah. And let's there are greener pastures beyond that,
Yeah, and even the whole New York Times thing. I mean, to me that was a sort of thing. The government has a secret UFO research group. It's like, of course they do.
Well, my thing with the New York Times thing was, to be sitting in my father-in-law's condo in Miami and to be looking at the UFO, the New York Times, the UFO Times, the New York Times actually quoting passports to Magonia and talking about the Sealy and unsealy courts, the fairy folklore stuff. That was my whoa, the discussion has fundamentally changed. And I,
Well, it's changed, but what has happened since then? Here we are.
A lot, I feel.
Do you?
Well, check how many articles about the possibility of discovering extraterrestrial life have been printed, since then.
But there were plenty printed before that too. I don't think it
yeah, but I actually feel there's been an increase. I know that our friend Michael M. Hughes, had a conversation with you about this, and I know that I still feel that that the New York Times articles and all the thing with the To the Stars initiative is more of a smokescreen campaign and deception than what the true believers would like to think. But at the same time, I have to admit that there's been a slight change in the way that people in the mainstream are looking at the phenomenon. For example, our friend Greg Bishop on his podcast Radio Misterioso had Diana Walsh Pasulka, this academician, that studies religions, and that it is about to release a book, American Cosmic, that will deal, with seeing the UFO phenomenon, from point of view of mythology and all of that. And she said in his show that one of her colleagues who used to tease her and mock her because of her open interest about UFOs changed his attitude and actually called her right after the New York Times article broke, because he wanted to ask her about the possibility of creating some kind of like group, or some kind of like academic group to try to study UFOs, because I guess the guy realized that the winds are changing and maybe there could be possible grants to be acquired, by studying UFOs. And to Diana's credit, she told him to get lost.
Good.
Well, to me, it's that old astrological piece of wisdom that is, millionaires don't believe in astrology, billionaires do.
Exactly.
It's the high elite actually accept, and again, that's something that like Diana tends to reiterate in her interviews, is that the smartest people in the room tend to think that there's something going on with this stuff.
Yep.
Not necessarily the ETH, but like something weird.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that I suspect that, honestly, from what I've heard, and trying to hold my cards close to my vest, I think that Diana is pretty close to some people who are cracking the nut, who are cracking the egg. And all those people are very secretive, and they all tend to say that it's not. It's the company you keep will lead you into the right sort of direction for what these things actually are. If that makes sort of oblique sense.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And any thoughts, Cherylee?
First off, where was she interviewed? I correspond with her, but I didn't know she was interviewed, and I'm curious now.
Yeah, radiomisterioso.com.
Okay, I'll have to look that up.
And honestly, I feel like she's our generation's Valet is Valet, but I feel like she's sort of. I feel like she's sort of becoming our generation's Valet in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
I feel like her level-headed sort of interdisciplinary quasi religious studies approach is very applicable to what we're experiencing in the tens, as we were, of the 21st century.
That's interesting. I'm going to have to ask her some questions.
Yeah, she's a very insightful thinker, that's for sure.
Yeah.
Somebody needs to organize a conference with Diana, with Jeffrey Kripal, with Dean Rader, between Dean Radin, with Paul Stamets, with Bruce Damer, with all these people, who are not invited to the International UFO Conference.
Well,
or
no
to
one will
contact
come
with them.
because it's not about like little
I don't
green
care,
scientists.
Jeff
It's not.
Bezos or Elon Musk could, organize it and,
It's
pay
it's
for it.
it's the same reason that I'm not invited to conferences anywhere. It's like it's no one wants to hear about like weird sort of co-creation on Greg's part, or the sort of Jungian archetypes, or fairy folk. It's not sexy enough.
Yeah.
Well,
Oh, yeah,
Jeremy
trust me.
Bainey,
it's not
organized a
tangible.
conference in Hawaii, and he invited Dennis McKenna, Whitley Strieber, and Jeffrey Kripal. So that, I mean, good on Jeremy.
I would honestly, yes, indeed. I would have loved I would have paid twice the amount of conference admission for the bar conversation, right? For the hotel conversation, that would have been 8 times the worth of the actual conference in that case.
Yeah.
Tim, you were going to say something?
Oh, I was just going to say that I've doing my virtual book tour for the new Bigfoot book. I get asked again and again, so what are these things? And I won't be nailed down on it. I just say, well, I don't know,
Mm-hmm.
and it's the people want that answer. So, if I came out and said, oh yeah, it's just an undiscovered ape or a relic hominid, I think I would get more bookings at the cryptid festivals and stuff. But when I can only be honest and say I don't know. I'm very interested in them, but I don't know. And it's the I don't know, or that sort of
deal breaker.
Yeah, exactly. That people really don't want. It's like you said, it's the unsexy answer. It's
Yeah. Well, honestly, I was sort of musing about this earlier tonight, but there comes a point where you're not one of one group or another group, and it's if you're doing it right, I think you start to step back and see that all this is sort of part of a spectrum of phenomena.
Mm-hmm.
It might not be the same thing. It might be the same thing. But at the end of the day, you realize that there are connective tissues between all these things.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
And I feel like a lot of these niches which we have, the ufologists, the cryptozoologists, the paranormalists, the ghost people, they tend to box themselves in. They don't want to interface with those other sort of areas, and I think that we have a lot to learn from each other. I think that we might all be right, and we might all be completely wrong.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
Yeah.
So what do you think? I don't know a lot about the UFO stuff, even though I know it was I'm the one who saw the article, but somebody had posted it somewhere, and I thought, this is bizarre. But when, I'm reading Whitley Strieber's newest book, and I haven't read Communion or any of the scary books. I've only read The Supernatural, and I'm just starting to read The Afterlife Revolution. And I mean, where they sort of look at that idea where all the weird stuff is really about communicating with the dead,
Well,
so how do you guys, how does that fit in?
I'll jump in because I feel like I probably have the most shallow version of this to engage with. But if you look at a lot of so there's, to me personally, there's this UFO, ghost, Bigfoot sort of continuum that things sort of revolve around. If you look at the Sasquatch lore, if you look at the Celtic fairy lore, if you look at the ghost lore, if you look at the UFO lore, there are a lot of there's a lot of continuity in between those. The fact that the near-death experience tends to mirror, and Cherylee, please don't think that I'm talking down to you about this because you are an experiencer and I'm not. But I feel like the near-death experience shares a lot with the abduction experience in terms of a tunnel of white light, the sense of levitation, the sense of transportation to an alternate space, the sense of being in the presence of entities that are not yourself, discarnate entities. If you look at a lot of what Anne Strieber's collected communion letter entities, communion letter entries rather, where you will find that people were talking about like interfacing with the deceased in their sort of abduction experiences. That seems to me more of a part of the near-death experience than it does the UFO. Look, there's a light in the sky. Sort of, I've been abducted. Sort of phenomena. Marry that with the fact that a lot of the fairy faith phenomena of the Celtic Isles seems to mirror that as well. Seeing deceased loved ones, the sense of out-of-body projection, the sense of an odd sort of humming sound that you'll experience, and also, with the Bigfoot Sasquatch thing, which sort of mirrors, sort of gloms onto the fairy thing in terms of an association with the dead, which you'll find, but also an association with the dead in terms of as being a spirit guide.
Well, they
It's
also
sort of-
tend to haunt cemeteries and burial mounds, and also.
Yeah,
Sure.
And that's what you find in the fairy folklore as well. So it all seems like to be this big one big ball of wax. And if I want to be really reductive, I'll say that it's all a ghost story. But I don't think it's all a ghost story because I think it's very reductive. But I think that's kind of getting to the heart of it, and that's what Anne Strieber said to Whitley. Is she said, Whitley, I think that all this has to do with what we call
dead.
death.
Yeah.
So again, I apologize if I rambled there a bit, but I think that there is a commonality there that we are ignoring at our peril as Forteans, as anomalists in general.
Sure. Also, because I feel that this kind of liminal experience are happening in a non-ordinary state of consciousness,
Yes.
and possibly because they are a huge challenge to the ego of the experiencer, almost like that, having a near death, that like, having been clinically death, or observing something that is so beyond your ordinary sense of the experience, like a flying saucer landing in your backyard, is such a blow to your the way that you feel that the reality works, that possibly also obliterates your sense of ego. I'm thinking nowadays. I've been thinking about so many correlations between the UFO phenomenon and psychedelic experiences.
Absolutely.
I feel that there's definitely a link there, and obviously there's a link between psychedelics and a near death.
That's been studied. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt, but there's actually been a study done on that compared near-death experiences to ayahuasca, and there's actually a lecture on YouTube about it. It was done at an IONS conference, an International Association for Near-Death Studies. I'm trying to think of the name of the Leister, I think, Dr. Leister. And I may have pronounced his name incorrectly. I do know him, but my mind is drawing a blank on his name again. But he actually looked at it, and you're right. A lot of, particularly the after effects, are very similar. The same as Kenneth Ring found, after effects with UFO experiencers and near-death experiencers are very similar. And I know, like, I've looked across the board, and I'm always amazed that when I find like a different sort of experiencer, even people who've just seen lights in the sky, they seem to, like, you don't have to see aliens. Just, they seem to have these same patterns. When you meet them, it's like, wow, like
that's something that Ring Collier, who was a frequent contributor to this podcast, commented on was the idea that perhaps the idea of the experience, rather, of being of interfacing with UFO contact, with interfacing with the divine, is the same as a near-death experience in the fact that it shatters reality. Because you'll find near-death experiencers who have for lack of a better term, experience poltergeist phenomena in their houses, and you'll find that same thing in UFO contactee experiences as well.
Yeah, I knew that, and I was shocked when I first heard that.
There's also, I mean, with Whitley Strieber, right? Talking about correlations between UFO encounters or alien abduction encounters and psychedelics, all these liminal, transformational experiences. Sometimes they are transformational for the good, and sometimes they are transformational for the detriment of the experiencer. I always felt that with Whitley, it's almost like he's never recovered from the experience. That almost like he had a bad LSD trip. Now, there are people who it's not the case with that, like, I don't know, Travis Walton, for example. I think that on overall, even though at the beginning it was kind of traumatic, but in the end, it was a positive experience for him. In fact, it seemed to have untapped some aspects of his personality that had remained dormant or that didn't, manifest.
Well,
like, for example, his ability to draw or his ability to write,
Well, to a certain degree, at the expense of certain personal relationships too. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's I would have to say, even whether it's a positive or negative outcome, there's always that feeling that you don't quite fit when you get back.
Yeah.
And you always carry that with you, that you don't quite belong. But
Sure.
what I was going to ask you though is so, if we're looking at this, it's all kind of related to, our relationship with the afterlife, like what comes next. Is it that when we have these experiences, do you think it's more that we're communicating with ourselves or our higher selves, or do you think in some cases we're communicating with something other?
Well, my personal supposition is that we're interfacing with psychopomps. So the idea that there are intercessor spirits between us and the divine, capital T, capital O, other, the idea that there is something that is sort of acting as an intercessor spirit between us and the other. If you look at a lot of traditions, these natively tend to manifest themselves in, animals. So deer, owls, ravens, those sort of things. And I think that we are misinterpreting those experiences whenever we have, the experience with the owl, which obviously grasps onto the alien gray sort of phenomena. See Mike Clelland's work. I think, I suspect that, again, that we're all telling this really elegantly enough, I suspect that we're all telling this really big ghost story of our lives. Our lives are a really big ghost story. And I think that perhaps whenever we have these moments where we touch the divine, we are touching actually this sort of psychopompic interface level. Shamans interface on the spirit level on the behalf of the humans, and psychopomps interface with humans on the behalf of the spirit level.
Yeah.
And I think that's sort of what we're flirting with. That's as of, what is this, the 26th, 23rd, 23rd of 24th of February. That's me right now on this
Yeah.
particular date. And that's sort of the idea that I'm flirting with. Yeah.
My thoughts are still pretty much that we don't understand what reality is. We don't understand what life is. We don't understand what death is, and our ideas about all of it are probably wrong.
And I'll push all my chips onto that too.
We don't understand who we are. So
Yep.
trying to come up with this kind of like boundary and say where do we end and where do the other begins, may be completely arbitrary. Are we dealing with an unknown aspect of ourselves or unconscious? Are we dealing with a true alien intelligence? The mystic will say, it doesn't matter because it's all aspects of one single consciousness.
Well, and let's move right into the next article, because that is pretty much what it's talking about. Scientists studying psychoactive drugs accidentally proved that the self is an illusion.
Oh God, we're through just one article. Jeez. Oh, jeez.
Oh no, we've gone through 2 articles.
Okay.
It's okay, Josh. It's all right.
Tim out. Tim,
Then let's go.
So this one talks about they're studying psilocybin, and let's see if I can kind of sum this whole thing up. They're talking about part of the problem is, so many of these tests are with small amounts of subjects. But there's a guy here, Anil Seth, that explains in his TED Talk that your brain hallucinates consciousness. Right now, billions of neurons in your brain are working together to generate a conscious experience, and not just any conscious experience, your experience of the world around you and yourself within it. He says, yet when you are unconscious, you continue to exist without perceiving your own presence. You cease to participate in reality, but continue to live. When roused back to consciousness, you lack a narrative to explain the time away. The narrative of the story seems to be your life is just a function of your brain's mechanisms, not who you really are. The hallucination of consciousness is one we're all having in tandem. When we agree about our hallucinations, we call it reality. In this agreed-upon reality, we are each separate individuals whose stories begin with our births and end with our deaths. And the funny thing is, his name is Seth, so it's, according to Seth, and all I'm thinking is this is exactly what, like, Jane Roberts Seth would say. And he says that there are other ways to experience reality, which you may have already glimpsed, if only fleetingly. Sometimes our consciousness shifts, the boundaries of the self seem to become less rigid, and we commune with another person or thing, as can happen during drug-induced epiphanies, sure, but can also happen when people fall in love, meditate, go out in nature, or experience a great meeting of minds. So that's the general idea, and they're talking about the effects that different drugs can have, and it's a fairly long article, so I'm not going to read the whole thing, but we'll post it in the notes.
This is one where I'm going to echo Joshua and go, yeah, and
right.
Like,
so let's.
If you've ever done psychedelics, it's just like, well, yeah, and
Yeah, but most of the population haven't done that.
Well, maybe they should get on that.
Sure. Well, they are still legal.
But Cherylee, let me ask you: does that jive with the experiences you had, especially your last near-death experience? Did it feel like you were still you, but yet connected to everything?
I would say that even, like, to various extents, when I've had not even a full-blown near-death experience, but there's been times when I've had kind of reliving that experience where that's how you feel. You just feel bigger and everything is joined, and you don't know where you stop and other people begin. Like, actually, even sort of in regular life, I often have those experiences where I don't do well in crowds because I have trouble with, boundary issues. So yeah, my consciousness seems to reach out, or at least I'm sure everybody's does, but I just think sometimes I'm aware of that feeling. I mean, like, lately I've had this stupid song going through my head, and I heard it for the first time like a couple days ago on YouTube, and I don't know why, but it's driving me nuts. It's just, even right now, this song has just popped into my head. Sorry, and it's very distracting. And and I'm sure it's from somebody else. I swear.
Hmm.
You know, I never even listened to the Foo Fighters before.
Well, yeah.
Which one? The sky
Something about
is
the sky? Yeah, something about the sky
oh,
being
yeah,
your
that's fine.
neighborhood.
The sky is the neighborhood. Yeah,
Yeah,
great
it's driving me nuts.
yeah.
It's you.
No, Diana was the one that Diana Walsh Pasulka asked Greg to play that song at the end of their conversation.
Oh, there you go.
So Diana's doing this to me.
Diana is doing this to you. Yeah.
I will have to send her an email.
And I think that's something that anyone, can tap into. It's just you had it kind of thrust upon you with your near-death experience. It kind of emphasized it, made it stronger.
Yeah, I think that everybody has those feelings. I think the children are they're very well, not always empathetic. Sometimes kids will be mean to each other and they don't care, but I think that they're more aware of how people around them feel because they haven't kind of grown to the point where they push that down.
Right.
And so, yeah. I was going to say just...
Go ahead.
Oh, sorry, we're all just getting tired. Yeah, I think it's just that when you have a near-death experience, it just reminds you of what you should already know.
Yeah.
That's an interesting way to put it. It's like kids remembering near-death, or not near-death, but reincarnational experiences as well.
Yeah.
Until they're taught that this is not a thing, they have no reason to doubt it.
Yeah.
Chris Ryan said that the first time that he tried psychedelics, that it was like remembering getting to a place before he was born. You know what I mean? Like, okay, I'm back here.
Huh. Now, who said that?
Chris Ryan, the guy I listen to religiously in his podcast, Tangentially Speaking.
Okay, all right. Yes, I do believe you've mentioned that one before.
Mm-hmm. And I will keep doing though.
So that, let's see. We had another stop in this conversation because the recorder malfunctioned, and I'm trying to remember which stories we contacted. We're doing the.
We did all the consciousness ones in a row, so we went from that to the ancient virus one, I think.
Okay. Yes. Yeah. So, do you want to sum this ancient virus thing up for everyone, Cherylee? You're the most qualified.
Yeah, I'm not qualified. I am not a biologist. Basically, the ancient virus one is that it's basically a materialistic look at consciousness. So when they're saying ancient viruses are responsible for consciousness, what they actually mean are ancient viruses may have had some impact on the ability of our brains to transfer information. So it's basically it's basically conflating information transfer with consciousness in that article. It's a great article for biology. It's just in terms of the terminology, it's written basically implying that mind equals brain and that there's no other way to look at it.
And it kind of goes with that assumption. It's like without coming out and saying it exactly. And then the next one that kind of relates to all this is the idea that you can sedate a plant. They were using anesthetics on plants, and plants are show a lot more consciousness than people give them credit for, because for the most part we see plants just sitting there. But they were using the anesthetics they use on us and found that plants seem to basically go dead for a short period of time and then kind of come back to life. very much like we do when we're under anesthesia. We just kind of blank out for a bit and then come back, implying that we're basically, it's a consciousness thing.
Yeah,
You know?
I love that article. I did.
I remember posting an article for the Daily Grail last year, a TED talk of a guy that was making experiments, before the audience, showing that, carnivorous plants were able to perform mathematical operations. They could count. They could basically
Really?
count.
Yeah.
So that tells you something, that tells you something about how our assumptions about plant life are so outdated, and this new article that we're discussing, about anesthetic and the anesthetic effect on a plant seems to suggest, that plants are far more complex than we give them credit for.
Yeah. And it asks bigger questions about what consciousness is. Since
Exactly.
Plants don't have brains like we do in any way, shape, or form.
Yeah.
Yeah, because if you look at some of the things that they showed, that they said that plants can assess risk, that they can actually make judgment calls. Like if you give them conditions where they've got two pots, one pot where has very stable conditions and one pot where it's very unstable. And if there's nutrient levels are really good in the stable pot, that's where the plant will set its roots in. But if the nutrient conditions are very low or in the stable pot and very up and down all over the place in the other one, the plant will make a risk assessment and decide it's better to take a gamble and go with the really fluctuating conditions in the hopes that you might get the good conditions somewhere in there. And like
maybe
that's
what's happening here is that plants, they're able to make decisions the same like mammals do, but they don't need a brain because the kind of decisions or the kind of behavior they have, they don't need to make rapid decisions. It's almost like in the movie, in the Lord of the Rings movie, when you have the ants, they have
Don't
the
be
three
hasty.
birds, and they have the gathering of the ants, and they took a whole day and a night just to say good morning.
Yeah.
But
Don't be
like
hasty.
one of the things that they had in that article is that plants can learn, and they did one experiment where they dropped plants, and it was one of those plants that's a sensitive plant where the leaves fold up when it's disturbed.
Mm-hmm.
And so for the first number of times when they dropped the plant, and like they did it so that it wouldn't be hurt, it would just be like going in one of those bungee jump things, so the plant at first would react to it, and then over time it just started ignoring it, that you could just drop it in this device and it wouldn't react anymore because it knew it wasn't in any danger.
And
they found that the plants actually remembered that over time.
And going back to Jane Roberts and Seth again, Seth would say that plants also have a form of consciousness that we just don't quite recognize, that works on a slower level.
Yeah. And of course, there's always, if you go back to the old Cleve Baxter, he was a CIA interrogation specialist that did experiments hooking up plants to lie detector machines and found they reacted. Now, he made claims that they actually had ESP, that if you were thinking of doing something bad to the plant would react.
Yeah.
And Mythbusters did a segment on that, and they actually they replicated his results.
Really?
Yeah. Yeah, it's a video on YouTube.
Interesting. Reminds me of the things that I read in Carlos Castañeda's books, that, trees have consciousness and trees actually hate us. They hate humanity, and actually, they have every reason to do so.
Well, I like trees, even if they hate us.
I love trees.
Okay, so let's move on to, let's see, did we do that one? Yes. What have we not done? We did that one.
Let's go with the Xeno effect one.
That's the one I was about to click on.
Right.
Do you want to tell us the idea on this red pill?
No, because I didn't read it, but it seems interesting enough.
Okay, so physicists were big words. Physicists from Cornell have proved that atoms will not move when someone is observing them. This is also known as the Xeno effect. This particular effect was reflected as one of the oddest predictions of quantum theory, but the experiments performed by physicists in the ultra-cold lab of Mukung Vengalator, thank you, have now successfully confirmed it. And of course, what this suggests, again, is that consciousness is somehow interacting with matter at such a level that it affects it. Like just observing, this is more of the observer effect of quantum physics in a sense.
Well, this is the problem, that I guess one of the biggest problems that we're facing now with current physics, because materialist scientists interpret the so-called observer effect as saying, no. This has nothing to do with consciousness. This is just a matter of our instruments, affecting what is being observed. It's just an aberration of our, crude observational instruments. And yet there are people like Dean Radin and other scientists who say, no, this alludes to something more fundamental. This alludes to the idea that consciousness predates or is more primordial than matter, in the building blocks of the universe. And this is something that I see at the forefront of the current scientific discussion. They are the materialists like Neil deGrasse Tyson and Lawrence Krauss and Bill Cox and all these people that science popularizers that say no, this is really not that big of a deal. And there are the people like that Deepak Chopra and others who say no, this proves that that consciousness is everything. I feel that this matter is the thing that we really need to sort out in order to move forward, in our understanding of reality.
Yeah, I would fully agree with that.
Or perhaps atoms are just very shy. They don't like to be watched.
Well, there's that too. Yeah, but that's, the more stuff that comes out like this, the more this is eventually going to be a sea change, where things are going to shift completely. And the materialists are going to realize that their version of reality just doesn't explain this stuff.
Do you think that change comes like a wave, or like just very like a creeping kind of tide,
That's a good question. As many people have said, it comes basically one coffin at a time.
Exactly.
But you know what? I was going to say, what I love about the article?
What?
Is the fact that they really, again, it's kind of a nuts and bolts sort of article where they talk about how this is really useful for quantum encryption, which is, big industry, and it's very important. They don't really tell you that, how quantum encryption was originally figured out had to do with a bunch of hippies who were, at Berkeley, doing ESP experiments and experimenting with Eastern mysticism and hanging out in hot tubs talking about Bell's theorem. There's actually a book about this called How the Hippie Saved Physics by David Kaiser. Great book. I love that book. I think he's done some talks on YouTube if you're not a reader and just want to get the history. But he talks about the whole history of how it really came down to a bunch of physicists who didn't want to go with the shut up and calculate type of physics. They wanted to really dig into the whole spooky stuff, you know.
Yeah.
And that is what led to the discovery of quantum encryption methods.
And to me, if you're a physicist, how can you not want to dig into the spooky stuff?
I know, but they don't. That's not where they teach universities.
It's too disturbing. Yeah.
You know.
It's like archaeologists not wanting to find lost civilizations.
Yeah. But yeah, no, I would highly. It's a really good book. Like it's a fun read.
Or better yet, it's like astronomers not wanting to see UFOs. Unless you're Jacques Vallée, in which case you become an astronomer to look for UFOs, only to be sorely disappointed.
Yeah.
What do you mean that's not what we're doing?
Yeah.
All right, so let's cover a couple of these that we had initially dealt with and did not record. Scientists discover ancient Mayan city hidden under Guatemalan jungle. And this is some mapping technology that, you know, our modern technology is helping us to uncover the past. And this city is huge. I believe that something like 10 million people may have lived in this area. And it's what, bigger than Manhattan? Was that the quote, Tim?
I think they said as many buildings as Manhattan. So
okay.
I don't know if it was spread out over more area or what, but either way, incredible. I mean,
we're saying 10 million, and maybe I'm wrong, but I think I read that by the time that Cortés came to Mexico, there were 20 million people in Mexico alone. So, I mean, this changes everything.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's the way history just keeps changing. And this is one of the ways that technology can really benefit our understanding of greater, you know, antiquity, something we never would have thought possible. Like no one would have thought, well, we just need the technology to map places like this. I mean, it's not something that was even thought of as a possible way of seeing into the past. So who knows what else we're going to invent over the years that will allow us to see better into the past.
Yeah, you know, that technology was originally made public when it was used to map the moon surface.
Yeah.
In 1971. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
You know, that it was invented back in the 60s.
But of course, we never went to the
meteorology.
moon, Cheryl, so.
The moon's just an illusion anyway.
Yes, it's a hologram.
And although Josh has left us for the night, Josh was saying the first time we went through this is that he puts a lot of weight into people like Graham Hancock and Randall Carlson and Robert Schoch and John Anthony West and Robert Bauval, all guys who have been saying this stuff was the case a long time ago, that we're underestimating these previous civilizations, that there's a lot more out there that the archaeological community just doesn't even want to look at for whatever reason. And again, to me, that's so puzzling. It's like, when I had Robert on, I think it's when he was on, either that or he just mentioned it to me at some point. He said that, you know, when he discovered the age of the Sphinx there with the water damage, he said he was really excited and he thought, hey, the Egyptologists are going to want to see this. This is really exciting. And he did not expect the backlash he got when he, you know, gave them this information. They hated him for it.
Yeah.
Well, isn't that what we deal with all aspects of this stuff? I mean, nobody wants to hear it from the established scientific community. If you know, whether it's UFOs or you know, historical finds like this or you know, Bigfoot, you know, your average anthropologist doesn't even want to hear about it, no matter how compelling the evidence is.
Yeah, and that kind of brings us to our next story, which is this on completely other side of the let's say the evidence. The Crimean pyramids built before dinosaurs roamed the earth. And this article, well, the ending of it I think is really interesting. So this guy in the Crimean Peninsula, on the edge of the Black Sea, has stated that he has discovered a string of pyramids and ancient sites using his own invented, he calls it geoholography and geohydrodiagnostics. And these devices have apparently discovered these ancient structures. And not only that, but revealed at the top of one of the structures, 3 beams of energy emanated at varying frequencies. And around the pyramid, a field of 10 by 109 hertz was found. His team state that the surrounding layers of one of the structures reveal that the underground pyramid that is there was originally above the surface in open air, but due to flooding, the whole area sank together with the structures. And he said that he said, okay, so here's the dinosaurs part. He discovered an unknown structure, which proved to be a giant pyramid of 45 meters in height and length of about 72 meters. Go said that the pyramid was built during the time of the dinosaurs. Where he gets that dating is completely unknown. It has a truncated top like a Mayan pyramid, but its appearance is more like an Egyptian one. It is hollow inside, and a mummy of an unknown creature is buried under the foundation. Now, the information on all this has not been proven in any way or accepted by archaeologists, and at the end here it says, so far around 7 pyramids have been registered forming a straight line from northwest to southeast. One of these pyramids is located underwater in the vicinity of the city of Pharos. In total, Gok believes there are around 39 pyramidical structures and monolithic buildings in the entire Crimean Peninsula. And then the people who wrote the article say, unfortunately, in the case of Gok, his claims are so outlandish that the Crimean pyramids have gone largely unreported. He started talking about them in 1999. But it seems that there is at least something there. It may be a pyramid, or it may even be a pyramid. It seems, however, that no one is willing to even do the most basic validation of that possibility. And this is like the opposite of what's happening in Central America, because you have a potential structure that may actually be real. I mean, there may be something of significance there, but this guy has thrown so many crazy things attached to it that no one wants to go anywhere near it.
He says that the pyramid is 100 million years old. I'm looking at his personal website right now, and I think his website is also 100 million years old. I mean, it's like from the 1990s. It's horrible.
So is it a dinosaur that's inside? Is that the unknown creature?
Maybe. An undiscovered dinosaur.
Yeah.
Hey, if it's true.
And that's how he got his dating.
If it's true, it'd be really interesting, I suppose.
Yeah.
But
I would put money on it.
And, of course, we brought up the Bosnian pyramid in the midst of all this, too. In the Bosnian pyramid, which Robert Schoch was invited to come, investigate and give his opinion on, and he looked at everything and was very disappointed to find out that it really wasn't an actual pyramid. It's a natural structure. Of course, when he told the guy this, he basically just badmouthed Schoch to everyone. And said that Schoch just, he's lying. He doesn't want to admit that this is a real structure. Schoch said to me, too, he said, I would love nothing more for that to have been a real structure, because if there's a 10,000-year-old pyramid in Bosnia, that just supports all my other work. He's like, but unfortunately, he's like, it's very obviously a natural formation. He's like, there's so many points that are just very obviously natural. He's like, yes, it does look artificial. He's like, but most of the artificial stuff has been tunnels, dug after the fact into this mountain.
Yeah, I mean, I feel that, thinking that the Bosnian pyramid or this one could create a revolution in archaeology is a bit misplaced. I feel that we should probably focus more on the the possibility of a pyramid in Gunung Padang.
Oh, yeah.
Something that
Well, there is a
Graham-
pyramid there.
Yeah, and that apparently a 20,000-year-old pyramid, and that in itself is, to me, that's revolutionary enough.
Yes. Oh, absolutely. And that's one of the places that certain people have suggested is actually the home of Atlantis.
Hmm.
That it was that we're reading the texts wrong, and that there was an advanced civilization there. And I think Graham is partially on that idea as well, that this could this was part of a very massive lost civilization.
Yep.
But the thing is, like with these Crimean pyramids, it's interesting. There could be something there. There could be pyramids anywhere. But the problem is, when this stuff starts getting taken up by people like this, it's reasonable that mainstream archaeologists don't want anything to do with it, because they don't want to be ridiculed for even considering that this guy might be onto something,
Yeah.
You get talk about people going, look, there are pyramids in Antarctica. And I wouldn't be totally shocked if there were pyramids in Antarctica, because during the last ice age, lesser Antarctica at least was temperate. So it's not totally out of the question that there could be structures there we haven't found yet. But the problem is, with the internet, you get that whole, oh, look, here's a pyramid. You see a mountain. It's like, okay, well, that's not proof. Just because it's a pyramidal shaped mountain doesn't prove it's an artificial structure.
Mm-hmm.
And again, it takes people away, serious people away from looking at the stuff because they don't want to be ridiculed.
Sure.
Yeah, I think people sometimes underestimate how regular geological structures can be.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Like when you look at things like the Giant's Causeway with all the little steps and things. I mean, that's just, a lot of it just depends on how rocks fracture.
Well, even in my personal experience, I took a friend back to the Toad Road area where my first book was about this, and this mythological insane asylum was supposed to be back there. There never was, but we came upon these boulders that were sheared all flat, and he's like, look at that, it's the foundation of something that. And I said, no, this, like, boulders can be sheared off. Like, I mean, that's what glaciers do when they pull back. They'll shear them off sometimes, very clean and flat. So, even in my own experience, I've just, you can run into stuff that looks very kind of man-made, but just is not.
And you know what? I still feel that there may be something about those pyramid structures in Mars.
Yes. Yeah. There's definitely some oddness to that whole area. It's not, there's the pyramids, the face, they're all in the same area. They're all aligned in very specific seeming coordinates. I don't know. Like, I wish we could just go there and look,
Exactly.
And NASA wants nothing, and the thing is, if NASA's looked, they're certainly not telling us. They were so reluctant to even, release any kind of imagery. And then the imagery they released was very low quality.
Yeah.
And as much as, I used to really like Hoagland's stuff. When I first started hearing about him and the Enterprise mission, I was really impressed. But after a while, to him, everything was an artificial structure.
Oh, yeah.
And it's like, okay, not everything's an artificial structure. Let's, that's it was kind of disappointing to me because, I really liked where he was going with this stuff. And when he looked at, what is the name of the planet? The moon. One of the moons around Saturn has
Enceladus?
I think it's the Death Star moon because it has this big open like shell of a thing with, like where the laser came out of the Death Star, and then it has like a trench running around it in a straight line. And he keeps saying, well, nature doesn't create straight lines. And I'm like, well, that's generally true. Yeah. But, it's like when you, again, going back to the electric universe stuff, when you look at some of what electrical discharges can do, they could have done that. It's just that we don't always understand what nature's capable of, and until you're looking at it in the right frame of mind, it can look really, really weird.
What was Hoagland's book about NASA? Dark something?
Yeah,
Dark Mission?
Dark Mission. Yeah, with Mike Barra.
And that went, I mean, android heads on the moon and glass structures.
Yeah,
on the moon and stuff. And I mean, so, like the photos look interesting. It certainly looks like maybe it could be an android head, but I don't know how you can like just claim. You can just make that claim outright. You know? Oh yeah, that's what it was, and that's why NASA went back there to get that android head.
And you have to understand that pareidolia is a thing. I mean, we do sometimes see
for sure
when you're looking at a picture of the moon or another planet or something like that. There's stuff that's going to look like stuff that it's not. It's just it's the way the picture is taken. It is the low quality of some of those early pictures, especially.
Yeah.
So, and it may be something. Who knows? There could be, but why? Why would there be an android head? Would be my question. You know what I mean? Like, why would we assume that they're going to build something that we plan on building in a sci-fi sort of futuristic world? But
yeah, I mean, it's the whole thing. And there's just, I don't know. He kind of lost me with that book.
Yeah.
There was so much, just the sheer quantity, and I believe he said that the moon landing wasn't a hoax, but that it was like a government misinformation thing they were spreading to cast doubt on it. So there would always be doubt as to whether we actually did go to the moon or not. So it's this like double secret kind of thing. It was that book was a difficult read for that reason. I think it was just like one thing after another after another.
I think what happened with Hoagland is he got so far down the rabbit hole of legitimately weird stuff that he got a little skewed somewhere along the line as to where to stop.
Yeah.
He's a cautionary tale.
Yeah, and it's so easy. It's so easy to to go down that rabbit hole.
Mm-hmm.
Because once you start going down that slope, everything starts seeming more reasonable.
Yeah, I think I might be halfway down.
We'll pull you up.
Why would you say that?
Oh, just because it's just the weird stuff that I've been getting into lately with these
the Dolly Parton videos.
Oh, no, I'm just seeing lights that this area that we've been going to. We just went out there and just saw the weirdest lights, and it's just everything. It's just so much weirdness where you just start going, okay, how much weird stuff can happen in this one little area? We went out initially to investigate Bigfoot stuff, and now we're getting weird lights, and we're getting like ghosts and other creatures people are seeing there. It's just so bizarre, and then suddenly everything's on the table. Now it's like, okay, what's going on? And I feel like I'm beginning to get more woo, as the Bigfoot people would say.
Well, I think sometimes the phenomena does that intentionally too. That's part of the trickster element to it.
Mm-hmm. Oh, sure.
Because it throws you off. It keeps you, not quite understanding what you're experiencing. You start believing everything's something weird.
Well, yeah, that's the danger as well. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, Cherylee, any comments on anything?
I had no knowledge of the author you were just talking about. The only thing that came to me is when you're talking about, is this just there to confuse us? It's like, what's that word? A koan? That, a riddle that's supposed to either drive you insane or drive you to a higher level of consciousness. Yeah, I think that, that idea that it's just...
Richard Hoagland is the guy who popularized the idea of the face on Mars being an artificial structure.
Okay, I've never read any of that stuff.
That was back in, I want to say, late 80s. He released the book. I think it was just called The Face on Mars.
Yeah.
And at the
Yeah.
time, and like I said, at the time, I was very impressed with him. I thought he was really onto something, and he was able to prove a lot of the weirdness going on. But again, he just at some point it seems like he went too far over the edge and lost his ability to really weigh out the facts properly.
Well,
Yeah.
it may also be a matter of, like we often talk about with people who do make a discovery or do come up with evidence in any part of this field, then they feel kind of the pressure to keep coming up with this evidence and discoveries and so forth. And a lot of times that leads to either, gross speculation or, sadly, sometimes even hoaxing.
Right.
Well, and sometimes when you have like I'm sure there are higher resolution images that would just clear this matter up one way or the other, but sometimes they don't release those higher resolution images because of security concerns. And it's like, yeah, we can do this and we don't want anyone else to know. That's often the case. That
Well, there was what was it? There was it used to be that NASA would stream all their probes real time publicly. Like, so as we went out to different planets and stuff like that, you could actually watch them get out there.
Oh.
And there was some incident where something was shown that they then tried to censor out. It was something UFO related, and people were like,
Yeah.
oh, they filmed the UFO, and I can't remember what it is. But after that, they started basically selling out their missions to independent companies. And that way they didn't have to release the stuff live because it wasn't being publicly funded. And that may have been monetary concerns that were totally unconnected, but a lot of people took that as they don't want anything else slipping by them that could possibly, be some, they're trying to control the narrative and they don't want anything slipping by because they're broadcasting this stuff live.
Yeah, I remember people who used to just be dedicated to watching that NASA feed. I mean, they were just on it, just looking for anomalies and stuff.
Yeah.
I when I was a kid, I loved anytime they showed that stuff. I can't remember which planet it was that they came up to. But being able to watch in real time as our probes came up to this planet for the first time ever was just amazing.
Yeah, but like you look at things like the LiDAR technology we talked about. It had been in use for 10 years before they admitted having it because they used it to do imaging on the moon. And I think a lot of same with things like GPS. It was a push by the aeronautics industry that said that helped make that kind of a mainstream thing now where everybody's phone has it and it's fairly accurate. But the accuracy of that was actually driven, for the need for airplane safety, because it had been purely a military application for a long time. So I think that sometimes it's just you won't see things not because there's a great conspiracy, but it's just they like to keep their technology quiet until it isn't.
Yeah.
Oh, absolutely. And that's the thing. Anytime, the thing I always say is the government always lies. They're always going to spin, whatever to their own good. It's what they do. It's the business they're in. It doesn't mean there's some grand conspiracy behind them doing so. It could just simply be, well, we don't feel like telling you. We might have a way of utilizing this in the future that, involves you not knowing. But, all right, let's do one more here, and then we'll call it a night since the recorder's still going.
Are you sure?
Amazingly, yeah. So, moral outrage is self-serving, say psychologists. And this is really this is an interesting article. Perpetually raging about the world's injustices, you're probably overcompensating. And what they did is they went through and they went through different groups of people, and they asked them about how they feel about this, how they feel about that, and they found for the most part, especially and this is especially true of things like Facebook, people were very morally, like, what's the one example they gave? It was really good. Feelings of guilt are a direct threat to one's sense that they are a moral person. And accordingly, research on guilt finds that this emotion elicits strategies aimed at alleviating guilt that do not always involve undoing one's actions. Furthermore, research shows that individuals respond to reminders of their group's moral culpability with feelings of outrage at third-party harm doing. These findings suggest that feelings of moral outrage, long thought to be grounded solely in concerns with maintaining justice, may sometimes reflect efforts to maintain a moral identity. Like, one of the examples they give is finding out, oh, well, your phone was made in a sweatshop in China. And you're more likely to kind of let that go because you don't want to not use your phone. And, but if you find out something that doesn't directly affect your lifestyle, well, then you can be morally outraged at it. And you may genuinely be morally outraged that these things are happening. But there's some ego involved. There's some, there's some puffing of the ego of, I'm a moral person. I'm expressing this because this is the right thing to do. But when you can actually make a difference, sometimes people don't do it.
You've just reminded me why I hate Facebook.
It says, for instance, respondents who read that Americans are the biggest consumer drivers of climate change reported significantly higher levels of outrage at the environmental destruction caused by multinational oil companies than did the respondents who read that the Chinese consumers were most to blame. So they kind of shift the blame. It's like, okay, so Americans are the cause. Well, I'm American and I don't want to take that blame, so I'll blame the corporations. But when they're saying, well, Chinese people are doing, well, those damn Chinese people, they should be more responsible and not do that.
Mm-hmm.
Not that this should be a huge shock to anyone that this is the case. But
it's why I post pictures of chipmunks on Facebook.
Still, moral outrage still hints to a sense of empathy,
yes.
which kind of good, sorry for getting political, but seeing that photo of Trump with those notes, jolted out when he was interviewing or he was greeting the survivors of the mass shooting in Parkland, Florida, that he needed to remind himself that he needed to show empathy to these kids was like, my God, it's like, it really feels like the simulation is about to break down anytime soon.
Here was the example I used. For instance, participants in study 1 read about sweatshop labor exploitation, rated their own identification with common consumer practices that allegedly contribute, then rated their level of anger at international corporations who perpetrate the exploitive system and desire to punish these entities. The results showed that increased guilt predicted increased punitiveness toward a third-party harm doer due to increased moral outrage at the target.
Yeah.
I've seen that used in marketing. It's funny. Some of the clothing outlets that sell what would be termed disposable clothing, like clothing that you're going to be wearing maybe one season, like one summer, and then it goes in the trash kind of thing, have started this campaign where they're going to recycle clothing. But what they don't tell you, and they do this to make you feel good, that you'll bring your old crappy clothing, throw it in the bins at their store and buy new stuff guilt-free. But the truth of the matter is that it's very, very difficult to recycle textiles. And the majority of what they're getting will either be shipped to Africa, where it'll end up in landfills over there because they don't want your used clothing either, or it'll end up in landfills here. And only a very tiny % is ever actually recycled. But the idea is to make you think that you're doing this wonderful thing and that this retailer that's selling essentially disposable clothing that's going to end up in landfills is really this good corporation, and it's the other outlets that are bad.
Yeah. And I've heard that before.
Yeah.
But isn't everything marketing when it comes down to it?
Oh, probably.
I mean, that's our world at this point. It's a bunch of marketing. And since Red Pill brought up the political thing, that there was one thing that I'd like just get you guys' thoughts on, and that's this whole crisis actor thing. There was a video that well, the thing is, there is a video of this one kid basically being fed lines, and he's just repeating the lines very poorly at that, because he kept screwing them up, and they had to keep redoing them. And I'm thinking, why is that happening? Like, I'm not ready to jump on the crisis actor thing, but that to me comes across as either someone's trying to sell a very specific narrative and using this to do it, or maybe there is something to the crisis actor thing.
I don't buy it for one bit. I mean, the crisis actor theory is that there is this giant cabal, George Soros or, the Rockefellers or whatever, who are trying to get the guns from the American people. And they have all these resources at their disposal and all these actors that they, deploy in all these, mass shootings. And they keep using the same actors over and over again, nobody thinks, maybe, people watch television and they have managed to record things and they will realize, it's the same guy, that was in the other mass shooting. So sorry, I mean, crisis actors to me personally is the scum, the pond scum of the conspiracy barrel, beneath flat earth, beneath Holocaust denial, it's something that I just won't take seriously.
Well, like I said, the only reason it gave me a little bit of pause is watching the actual video of this kid not knowing what he was supposed to say.
Well, I haven't been interviewed in television. I probably will behave differently than how I'm behaving right now, because I will be too self-conscious. I'll be extremely nervous. Probably I would have been coached by some, staffer there, telling me how I should react, where I need to stand, where I need to look into the camera and waiting for, a signal. So all these cues and all these things will probably affect your behavior and make you look like you are being, following some kind of script.
Well, and I could see, given the situation, that there is this kind of thing where all the school children are going to say their point of view, and there's a peer pressure thing going on, and
probably,
there's probably some encouragement from parents too. Everybody's kind of trying to find a solution to this thing. A horrible thing happened, and everyone wants to do something to fix it, and the poor kid's there without the experience of being able to speak in public, and he's sort of being carried along by this wave too. But I don't know
if these kids are being led by their parents. I mean, I don't know. These kids are what, 15, 16 years old.
Something like that. Yeah.
By that age, you're not listening to your parents anymore.
I think when something really terrible like this happens, that even when you're at that ugly age, I think you still look to your parents when some real tragedy strikes. When there's a death in the family or somebody becomes very ill, you still look for your family structure to support you.
Maybe, or maybe you're in this age of rebellion. I mean, in Mexico in 1968, there were plenty of kids that went against the wishes of their parents, and they were protesting, against the government, and they paid a dear price for it. There was a massacre here in Mexico in in October 1968. So I don't know. I think something really interesting is happening right now in the United States. I truly do. Something that if fostered properly, if encouraged properly, could lead to something truly dramatic, truly life changing, paradigm changing. I think this movement is the most important social movement that has arisen in America since the Occupy Wall Street movement of
Well, see, when I
five,
look at
7
it, of course, I'm older than you, so I look at it and I think it's 40 years ago happening again.
Yeah.
I mean, it's like even Canada, we had a Trudeau in the prime minister's office, and he did not get along with he didn't get along with Nixon.
Yeah.
Americans were fleeing to Canada to
Yeah.
get out of the war. Like, a lot of my university professors ended up being people who had stayed in Canada because they had gone to avoid being drafted, or they were sent by their families before they were old enough to be even considered. But, I mean, Michael Persinger, he actually left the United States for that reason. So, I mean, and it made a big impact. I mean, there was like 70,000 Americans came to Canada, which made a huge shift in my country's politics to a much more left wing, because all the people of that particular political belief system, came to my country, and there was just pushed us to a very far left. And
Interesting.
while your country went to a very far right in the intervening years. So it's kind of, for me, it's just the sense of deja vu as to what's going on.
As regards the so-called crisis actors, if there's any validity to it, like, I would look at it like this. My thought doesn't go to George Soros or liberals hiring the same people over and over again, because it's ridiculous and no one would be that dumb. My thought would go actually to the other side, hiring these people to take sympathy away from.
Yeah.
Because it's a very sympathetic situation.
Yeah.
So if a pro-gun people, ultra-conservative or whatever they are, were to sort of muddy the waters with these crisis actors and say, look, they're making it all up. Now they're taking sympathy away from the gun victims. That's right where my mind goes. My mind goes because no one's dumb enough to hire these same people again and again. But if they can throw this out there and just muddy the water, then they can take sympathy away from people, if there's any validity to it at all. That's who knows?
Yeah, worth considering.
Yeah, I mean, I just find it really sad that people who've already gone through this tragedy, some of them, they're saying, and maybe this is false media reports, I don't know, but they're getting threatening, death threats and things because people are calling them, the crisis actors, and saying that this is all a big fake thing. And it's like every time there's like a mass shooting, you sort of sit there and go, okay, how long will it be before the first person says this was fake?
Yeah.
Sure. Or too soon.
Yeah.
We have one every 4 days, but it's always too soon to talk about them.
Well, and I think there's a lot of factors there too. I think there's the factor that reasonably people don't trust the government. They don't trust the media, and they're looking for some other explanation as to what happened. Like, they would rather believe that this was some elaborate plot than that people can get so messed up that they just go on mass shootings.
Sure, yeah.
It definitely becomes a belief. It's like that has to be what it is. It can't possibly be that these people are just doing this. Who would just do this stuff?
Yeah, and the idea that it's a mental health issue. It's a problem of people who take antidepressants or play violent video games. It's definitely not a matter of the United States being so enamored with weapons, and guns and assault rifles.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I saw somebody pointing out, like trying to say it's the violent video games and the violent movies again. They're bringing up that old drum beat again.
Mhm.
American culture is like that's like our biggest export. So we export our culture everywhere. So everyone all over the world are seeing these same movies. Certainly, Canada gets all the movies that America
Yeah.
puts out.
and I know, and I was going to say we have guns here.
Right? Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
I know that we have more restrictions on things like handguns and automatic weapons, but you can still kill a lot of people with what's available to us.
Sure.
And yeah, and I've lived in both countries, and the biggest difference that I can see is just social safety net issues, like
Right.
universal health care. That is a huge difference.
Sure.
I mean, I
Sure.
found hospitals so frightening when we were in the States, and I was fully covered. Like, it was a military posting when we were down there, so everything was covered, and I didn't have to worry about it. But I still found going into hospitals there a very different experience than in Canada, where you just go in and you aren't worried about signing forms to make sure things are paid. That you just give them your health card and you're looked after, and there you go. It's just a different attitude. And there's also just the feeling that, like, when I got told by my neighbor, and we were like in a nice neighborhood, and the first day I moved in, to the house in Colorado, where the lady next door came over to me and explained that you don't open your door just for anyone. You look through, and if you don't know them, you pretend they're not there. And I'm like, seriously? Americans don't open their door when people knock on their door? And they go, no, you never do that. And if I'm coming over, I will phone you first. Like,
Jesus. Yeah, there's this idea that you're on your own. No one is there to help you.
yeah. And
No wonder they need they feel the need to arm themselves with all these weapons and all this food, because instead of having their neighbor be there to help them out, they fear the neighbor, that they're gonna come there and kill them and take all their stuff. I mean, there's this lack of social cohesion that I see in America that is so troubling, and it's getting wider and wider as the economic gap between the have and the have-nots. It's increasing, and it is really troubling. I feel. I mean, it's not to be an alarmist or a catastrophist, but I do feel that American collapse is just around the corner.
Very possible.
Yeah.
And you kind of hit the nail on the head there too, with the cause behind it. And I forgot what you just said. What was it you just said? That
American cohesion. You're on your own.
no.
you mean the social safety nets?
No. After the social safety nets.
A fracture.
Wow. My brain just lost everything it was just thinking. But
it's such a different culture, and it shocked me how different it was. Because in Canada, like, you see American TV overwhelmingly, and it seems like it's not that much different than us. Mind you, there are a lot of Canadian actors. A lot of shows are filmed in Vancouver and Toronto these days, but still, when you look at those shows, you don't really think that there's that much difference between the States and in Canada. But when you go and live there, oh my gosh, it's very, very different.
Mm.
And there is that feeling that, if something happened, who would look after me? Like, I found it very scary. And it's not like living in a new place, because we've lived in lots of places in Canada, because, moved around a lot. I've served in the military, so I've been in lots of different places and never had that feeling, that I wasn't quite sure if I would be looked after if something happened to me, that I felt like when we were there.
And of course, the whole blaming the media or blaming video games, music, and stuff. I mean, it goes back to the whole lack of responsibility. You saw it during the Satanic Panic, where metal bands would get blamed for people killing themselves. The most ridiculous being the whole Suicide Solution from Ozzy, which is a song about not drinking yourself to death, and it's being accused of being the reason someone killed themselves. But
well, there was a backwards message in there, so he had to.
no, that was Priest. That was Priest that did
I
that.
know. I'm just.
And they didn't even necessarily, you can barely even hear it. The whole backward masking thing is such a up in the air type of thing that someone just said, "Oh no, this is a thing." You know?
Yeah, I know. No, it's about equivalent to like a lot of EVPs. Like if you want to hear something there, you're going to hear it.
Yeah.
But you know it really kind of took off when you had the whole Columbine thing, which was like probably the modern version of everything, the first modern case of what's been going on. It's not that shootings haven't happened before, but Columbine really shocked everyone. And of course, instead of being like, well, what are the core problems here that allowed this to happen? Instead, it's let's blame KMFDM and Marilyn Manson. You know,
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so when you're not addressing the problem, you're not fixing it.
Mm-hmm. And I'd like to think there are ways, we can fix it without taking everyone's guns away. And we just need to be able to talk about the issues, and they won't. That's like it's not even up. Like we're not even allowed to talk about it.
But then again, why do you need the guns for in place?
I don't. I mean, I've never felt the need for one. A lot of people say I'm crazy. I'm out in the woods all the time. I never carry a firearm. I don't own one. I'm not afraid in that sense, to just like do what I need to do, and I can handle stuff well. I view a lot of people. We have open carry in Redline where I live, so people are allowed to just walk around with guns on their belts, and I see the people do it, and I just see them as scared. I see them as frightened people.
Mm-hmm.
A friend of mine was doing it, and I said to him one day, I said, dude, like old women walk down the street and they don't have any problem here, and little kids, and you feel the need you got to put a gun on your hip. Well, he's like, well, when I need it. He gives the whole thing.
Yeah.
I just see you as just scared. That's why I just see you as a scared person. But
land of the free, home of the brave. Yeah, right.
But here's the other thing. We've had guns throughout the whole history of the United States. It's been a common thing. Why suddenly are we having these things happen?
Right, and that's what I mean when I say like I truly believe there's a way we can do this if we're allowed to talk about it. If we could come together, if we as a nation we could do this. I don't have the answers. It's not my pay grade. To have all the answers. It's above my pay grade. But I believe that we could come to a thing where we don't have to take everyone's guns away, and we can get to the reasonable thing. And I think that social safety net is a huge thing. I think Cherylee hit the nail on the head with that. I think that's a huge part of it.
Oh no, I know exactly what it was that Red Pill said that I thought was dead on. It's the income gap.
Mm-hmm.
Well, yeah.
That is one of the biggest problems in the world, but particularly in the United States, is this huge gap between the rich and poor.
And with those social safety nets, it would matter less, though.
Yes. Exactly.
Yeah.
But that's I think where the stresses are coming from that are causing some of these issues. These people are feeling hopeless. They're feeling scared. They're they're in a sense giving up, and they're taking it out on whatever's around them.
There was this news article that broke probably 1 month ago of this guy in New York that won the lottery, right? The first thing that the guy did was he went to see a doctor. He hadn't done in quite some time because he was self-employed. He was a carpenter, right? So he didn't have any social security. He didn't have any medical insurance. And the doctor told him that he had stage 4 cancer. So he died weeks after he cashed in, his lottery, prize. So I don't know, that to me that perfectly encapsulates the problem with. I don't want to say American society. I mean, with Western society. You know, this idea that people are not being taken care of. You know, and the idea that a medical healthcare is a privilege. You know, yet everyone has the right to have a gun. Is like, we have our priorities so dead wrong.
And see, in most Western countries, it's the opposite. That
Exactly.
Yeah.
Go figure. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, that's the one big difference between, the States and pretty much all of the other Western nations, is that everybody else has some form of socialized healthcare in place.
Yeah. And some people say, well, America is different because we have, 300 billion people, whereas, United Kingdom is like, 50 million. Okay, so divide your country, dudes. You don't need to be so goddamn big anymore. Go and become, 3 or 4 different nations and solve your problems.
It's not just that. It's not so much that we need to divide the nations, that we need to give the states more power and take some of that power away from the federal government. Because you can't hold New York to the same views of, like, say, Kentucky. And nothing against people in Kentucky or New York. It's just that they have different ways of viewing things. And what's okay in one place is not necessarily going to be okay in another place. And instead of understanding this and saying, okay, well, you guys should be able to make the laws that govern your local area, we instead try to cover everything. Some cases would be some areas are totally okay with legalization of marijuana, but the federal government still says it's not okay. Well, get the federal government out of there. So it's not a matter
Seriah, I don't see the problem with having a big centralized government. I don't see that as being your problem in the United States. The problem I see is that you have been giving corporations more power than governments.
Not just power, you gave corporations identities. They're people now.
Yeah.
Yep.
Exactly.
They are people, but they are people that can never die, which is, to me,
exactly.
Unbelievable. It's an unbelievable right they have.
But again, I think if you take the power away from the federal government for certain things, then you also take the power away from the corporations.
Maybe. Yeah.
I don't necessarily think that a large federal government is a problem if it's there to take care of the things that it should be there to take care of.
I don't know. I see places here in Mexico in which the government has failed to provide the populace with, the core or the base necessities, food, water, healthcare. And I see the drug cartels filling in that void. And the drug cartels, you could see them as a rogue corporation. A corporation that has more contempt for regulations that normal corporations, or that have they don't try to hide or find ways to go and bypass regulations as other corporations.
Fair enough. All right. Well, let's not get overly political here at the end. That's probably more than we normally do as far as politics go.
Well, it's a huge thing. I mean, it's everywhere right now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I just wish people would discuss more rather than like people just take these diametrically opposed views.
Yeah.
It's like, and instead of discussing the points where we agree, we're just fighting one another.
Yeah, well, the both parties, I guess, I'm trying not to point fingers, but they've done a fantastic job of dividing people, and it's a very much like a sports team atmosphere. This is my team, and I'm behind them no matter what.
Yeah.
Even if I don't agree with them.
Yeah.
Yeah, and what people don't have discussions anymore. They unfriend each other on Facebook for having the wrong views.
Mhm.
Yes. Yeah.
So everybody's finding their echo chamber, and that's and it's not just the States that's doing that. I'm finding that more and more here in Canada, where I used to think it was safe to talk about any political view here, and now I don't really find that's the case. That we're starting to become, us and thems, and we never were before.
Yeah.
Well, it's easy if you just, do the us and them thing.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Because then you don't have to think too hard about it.
Oh, now have you seen Electric Dreams?
Electric Dream.
The new Philip K. Dick series?
Oh, no, not yet. Not yet.
Okay, because then I don't want to spoil it for you, but yeah, they have an episode about thems. That's really
Huh.
really
Interesting.
is about this exactly. It's
Oh.
yeah, it's such a good series.
I don't know. I feel like if people would understand that we should be trying to find the right answers to these problems, irregardless of who came up with the answers,
Yeah.
irregardless of whatever ideology you hold, like you can take the idea from the left or the right if it's the right idea.
Yeah.
And that should be what we're doing. Instead, it's just everything is so divided.
Yeah, it really is. It's
Yeah.
It's a wound that I mean, I hope it's healed, but I don't see how this wound gets healed. I really don't. Maybe I'm being a little bit.
I'll tell you how it's healed through a mass tragedy.
So we've had a bunch of those. It's only gotten worse.
Yeah, like like for example here in Mexico, after the earthquake in September, there was this huge onslaught of popular social solidarity. It was amazing. You get a high about how people were so adamant to try to give a hand to their neighbors or even people who they didn't know. So those kind of things gives you hope. The thing that is happening with the kids right now in Florida and that are protesting against guns and the NRA gives you hope. I think that kind of thing we need to find ways to foster it, tapping into, because that is the way in which societies can change without revolutions or violent takeovers.
And it's also, again, people, I think it's important that people understand that it's okay to, for instance, I am pro legalization of pot. I've never smoked pot in my life.
Exactly.
But to me, it makes sense. I am anti-gun personally. I don't own a gun. I don't want to own a gun. However, I totally respect the right of somebody to own a gun. However, that doesn't mean I support the stuff the NRA pulls.
Yeah.
I mean, there are nuances here, and it's okay to stand up for someone else's to be okay with something and not be personally supporting it, I guess. Is the way
Exactly. Yeah, I'm pro gay marriage. I'm not about to try to marry another man.
Except Josh. All right. So, I thank you all, and I thank Josh, who's probably drunkenly meandering about his house at this point.
Yeah.
I just imagine I'm sort of passed out, and the mic came unplugged when he nodded out.
Yeah.
I think when we lost the recording, we didn't lose the recording. We lost about 10 minutes of it because he dropped out for some reason. I don't know what happened, but it stopped recording when he dropped out. Hey, look, it's still recording. All right, excellent.
Good to know.
I think we got everything this time.
I might cry this time if it.
Yeah.
We'll just blame it on Cherylee. Don't tell her.
Oh, gee, thanks. I get blamed enough. Thanks.
It's her electrosensitivity that keeps killing the recording.
Yeah, in Josh's house. Yeah.
Right, and it's not that I forgot to start it. It was all her. All right. Thank you all.
Sure thing.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
And a special thanks to our Patreons who are donating at the $10 or above level. Christopher Sheehan, Mark Brady, Allison Cook, Christopher Vaughn, Robert Groom, Chris Elmquist, Super Inframan, Patricia Giaquinta, Lauren Melton, John Eddy, Alfred Tuttle, Kevin Schreck, and Carla Mahoney. Thank you all so very much. You have been listening to Where Did the Road Go? This show is made possible in part from our Patreons, and we thank you and everyone listening for helping us continue